Welcome back to Speed Demon Painting, where today we are taking a look at the Empire Order of Battle, or ORBAT for short. The Empire is a force made up of two different nations, two major nations, the Chinese and the Japanese, and they both have a very distinctive playstyle compared to each other, so keep that in the back of your head when you're selecting this force. If you want to have a fleet that specializes more in flame weaponry, alchemical weaponry, and really getting up close and personal, then the Empire, when you want to take the Chinese route in the Empire, if you like big, heavy warships that are a lot more traditional, but very tough, very durable, you kind of want to go the route for the Japanese force, but nothing stops you from just taking both of them and mixing them up. The first thing we're taking a look at are the Empire weapon qualities and their special rules, and when we're looking at the weapon qualities, the first thing we see is alchemical weapons. I think this is incredibly strong. What does it do? If you have a model that doesn't have a disorder condition yet, and it is damaged by a weapon with this quality, it will receive one disorder condition. So you don't even have to score a critical hit or a catastrophic hit against your opponent, you can just do a point of damage. It's even 2 if the attack has the torrent quality, and that's usually with your flamethrowers, the Hawkyangs in this fleet that do this. Now, if a model is damaged by this weapon and it already has disorder, you do not get an increase in disorder, they instead suffer a point of damage, and that is really strong. You have to remember, normally when you take a point of disorder, the player gets an option to either increase the disorder or take a point of damage. In general, you don't really want to take those points of damage because you will lose your hull points very fast. And if you're being hit by these types of weapons, you don't get a choice, you have to take them. And spreading out disorder tokens is not exactly hard for a Chinese themed Empire force, because they can get a lot of these weapons in as well. When it comes to the special rules, in general, you will find contra-rotation. This is mostly found again on the Chinese ships. If you're in your special operations phase, you can use this one, unless you have the navigation lock critical damage marker. If you're making a contra-rotation, you go to a drift of 0, so you lose the extra movement that you get out of your drift, and you lose a bit of extra speed as well, which depends on the mass of the ship for that activation, so you definitely slow down. However, during any point in your movement step, the model may make a single turn on the spot of up to 90 degrees and continue. That is unparalleled mobility compared to other fleets, and it's next to impossible to outmaneuver ships from the Chinese faction because of this contra-rotation. The other rule that they get is heavy magazines. We've seen this one before. If you are shooting with heavy or normal gun batteries, or heavy or normal rocket batteries, up to 3 of those weapons may use the lead value instead of the support value. This is a massive buff to some of the flagships in this force, and that really makes them a dangerous opponent as well. Another thing that they have commonly is Shadow Hunter. Shadow Hunter means that before any vanguard moves, after you have both deployed, you can actually redeploy a unit in the force with this rule. And you have to take it in turns. So if you both have units with Shadow Hunter, you both have to take it in turns to move one. You can only be redeployed once though, and you have to be redeployed in your own deployment area. But that means it's very hard to face an Empire opponent and know what they are doing with their deployment. They can really pull a number on you, and there are some units that make good advantage of this rule, more on which later. And then the next one is the Mark of Yama. It is their specialization for using rocket attacks. Well, they say aerial quality, but in essence that's rocket attacks. It only works now from closing range or less, so it was slightly nerfed compared to previous Orbats. But if your opponent has one or more critical damage markers, your aerial attacks gain the homing quality. Now what does homing quality do? You can reroll your blanks, and your opponent cannot gain an obscured bonus against that attack. So it can be very strong, but I think this rule has to be considered more of a small bonus to your force, something you can get, but I wouldn't build my list around it. I would much rather go for lists built around the alchemical weapon quality rather than the ones based around the Mark of Yama. Next up, we're taking a look at the different battle fleets available to the Empire and what benefits they provide. Now, the first generic benefit you can get is a command reroll. We've seen this before. It's your bad luck protection. You essentially pick up all of the dice from a particularly bad dice roll and just roll all of the dice again. Be mindful that you don't use any abilities that allow you to reroll beforehand. Just use this firmly. If you go like, well, this is unsalvageable, use it. The Cloud Strike is something that was similarly seen in the Crown Orbat, but these are the OGs when it comes to having this function. In the second and the fourth battle round, you get an SRS stack. That stack of SRS tokens has as many tokens in it for every unit in the battle fleet in the play area at the start of that round. So let's say that your fleet still has 4 units on the field on round 2, you get a stack of 4 tokens. If that has dwindled down to just 2 units by turn 4, well, then you're only getting 2 SRS tokens at that stage. How do you launch them? Well, you assign them to any ship in that fleet, and when that one gets activated, it is launched within 20 inch of that unit. As you would normally do with SRS tokens, you do that in the special operations phase. They cannot do any SRS missions though, such as long range sorties, because they are all removed and discarded at the end of the second and fourth round anyway. And you can't do any SRS missions. There's a few new ones, like recon flights, that you just can't do with those. So it's purely offensive or defensive if you're using them to defend yourself against a stack of SRS tokens launched by the enemy for an intercept. The first battle fleet you get is the generic one, and the good thing is it has both of these as a command reroll. Now there's something special about the Empire battle fleet as well. It can mix both Japanese and Chinese ships in there because it just requires the Empire trait, and that gives you an extra bonus because any unit with a Chinese traits can actually take the special type of submersible automata for 15 points. Now this is a special type of corvette unit that actually creates a bit of extra oomph in the attack, as we'll see later on, and I think this is actually one of the more funky generic battle fleets that you can get because of this. Now when we start looking at the themed fleets, the first one is the Ninjing battle fleet. This is your traditional Chinese battleship, the Ninjing class, and you have to include a Jian unit. Now there's nothing wrong with that because, as we'll see later on, the Jian unit I think is quite a strong one. So you can just include any 3 units with the Chinese trait, so you're locked into that one route for this battle fleet. You get the Cloud Strike bonus, and if you have at least 1 maximum size Jian unit, and I believe that's now 3 of these ships, then you get the devastating quality to their heavy Hokyang and Hokyang, and this is both for the Ninjing ship and any Jian units. Now the Hokyangs are these flamethrower type weapons, as we'll discuss later on, with that alchemical roll we mentioned before, and very, very strong. If you give these units an additional devastating quality, this is, in my opinion, the best fleet that they have available to them. The other one, the Yangtze battle fleet, also available to the Chinese, is the one where you take the Yangtze class flagship. Now, out of all of the flagships available in Dystopian Wars at the moment, I think this one is the one that received the lowest amount of buffs compared to the other one. I think this one has fallen by the wayside a bit, but we'll discuss that in more detail when we get to the flagships. You have to include a Maru unit. That's not a bad thing. The Marus are a very strong option as well in my book. And you have to go for 3 more Chinese units as well. Now, you get an additional command reroll if you take 1 maximum sized Maru units on top of the original command reroll that you already get. I don't think this is nearly as strong as what you're getting with the Ninjing battle fleet, but you have to remember the Ninjing battle fleet comes with no command rerolls at all. So yeah, bad luck protection is something that's an obvious downside to Ninjing. A very special one in types of battle fleet is a specific Tianlong battle fleet. Now, the fleet itself has to have a maximum sized unit of the special aerial dragon ship, we called it the Tianlong. I love those models. They're the ones that got me into this faction to begin with, as an extra one, and they gained a flagship trait. The additional units that you can take, there's not a lot of options there. You can just include more Tianlongs or Gong units. There's a special kind of destroyer unit that we'll discuss later on. Very strong entry as well, so nothing wrong with having to take those. They gain Cloud Strike, so you can get those SRS tokens from them, which is very, very good. However, most of the times I find myself taking just this maximum sized unit and nothing else. Because I went for the Japanese route and I don't want to include any Gong units, but that's just a me thing. You don't have to do that. You can use Cloud Strike, but you'll be hard pressed to get a lot of additional units in there simply because of how this battle fleet is composed. The real benefit though is if you take the Tianlong units, all of them in this battle fleet, so that's not just the ones from the flagship trait, all of them receive an internal shroud generator, and that is super powerful. That means also that they can't replace their heavy gun battery with a shroud generator, but that makes total sense. That is a very strong freebie to be tossed into that Tianlong battle fleet, and yeah, well worth considering. And then finally we have the Congo battle fleet. This one's specially made for the Japanese, because as you can see, you're locked into these words. You take the Congo class battleship, heavy battleship, very strong unit, and you have to take an Osaka unit to go with it. Now, you cannot take more than 2 of any unit, which is not normally a problem because you get 3 free units to choose from. So, that is mentioned a few times, by the way, and I skimmed over it because it has very few consequences. You get that command reroll, which is good, and if you include 1 maximum sized Osaka unit, the Congo gains devastating to their heavy gun batteries, making it a truly fearsome ship, like we have seen with ships like the Crown Britannia fleet. It is a very strong option. And then mercenaries, they can take the 4 mercenary fleets, but none of them are specifically for the Empire, so we're not going to go into them into this deep dive. I refer to you to other deep dives if you want to see them. Also, if you want to see more of this type of content, make sure that you like the video so others can find it more easily, and subscribe to the channel for more future content like this. Next up, we're having a look at the Empire equipment, the outfitting yards, and the first thing that we notice is the Cheetah Submersible Automata. Now, the Cheetah Submersible Automata is an escort type ship. Normally those things just give you a bit of extra defense value for the ship that they are accompanying, but this one is a special one. First of all, it cannot be targeted except by weapons with the submerged quality. And only then if it's not at a point blank range. So it's difficult to knock them out unless you're targeting them specifically with torpedoes, and those torpedoes tend to be very much overkill to kill these things anyway. And as we'll later discover, the Japanese have ways to just repair those when your opponent is doing that. Now, what makes them special? First of all, is a bit of a downside. They only give +1 to submerged defense value for every model in the unit, so they assist with that one. But more importantly, each Cheetah gives +2 action dice to any assault action dice pools made by any models in the same unit. So if you want to go and get an extra bit of oomph in the assault phase, these Shita units can do this quite well. And yeah, that makes the Japanese a bit of a no-nonsense faction to just go forward and assault the enemy as well. And, mustn't forget, we just saw the Empire generic fleet, your Chinese ships that already want to go forward with the Hokyang thing, they can benefit from this as well, if you take them in the generic fleet. Speaking of the Hokyang, this is it one. It has been upgraded in a very good way. Previously, it only had one way of firing, and that was with the torrent template. That's that big flame template that comes into the Gubbins box, which very much limits its range. That's the gout profile now, where you just hose your opponent with a big old flame. Can get very devastating though, if you manage to get up close and personal. But more importantly, when it's battle ready only, so that stops being a threat once you get crippled, you can fire the Hokyang or heavy Hokyang using the blade profile, and that one in general has a range up to closing range, and we'll talk a bit more about that once we're looking at the weapon stats. When we're looking at the Empire generators, you find all the usual suspects here, except for the one that is specific to them, and that is the interface generator, and that one is a doozy. First of all, it has a bit of a weird way of operating. It's not always on. The generator can only be used by battle-ready models, and it has to be done in the special operations phase, so it has a few limitations compared to other generators. When it uses it, it becomes an interface model. Now that has a couple of advantages. First of all, it counts as having a mass attribute of 1 for the purpose of the gunnery quality. So if gunnery quality weapons shoot at mass 1 ships, they do not get to roll any additional dice for their exploding hits, which is not a good thing, of course, and you can confer this bonus, or this downside rather, to your much bigger ships, which is, well, a big deal. And also for calculating line of sight, so you can more easily hide behind terrain and other ships should you so desire with your big ships. So, in addition, an attack from any weapon against this model, except those with piercing or arc qualities, so those are the ones you're vulnerable to, count each heavy hit as just a single hit instead, further reducing the efficacy of almost anything shooting at it. Exploding hits still count as normal, though keep in mind the ones with the gunnery quality will suffer from it as well. You can also pass through any models or terrain during the movement without causing any collisions, so it's not just a shroud generator on steroids, it has that special Levant type of generator advantage built in as well. Once it completes its movement, it must not of course be touching any other models or terrain feature, it has to be able to fully move across it. The unit remains interfaced until the start of its next activation, and there's only one way of getting it out of there, and that's by crippling it during the round itself. So, or I think generator shutdown as well. This is an insanely strong generator that the Empire has access to, and if you can give it to a ship, I would. It's very, very strong. Looking at the weapon qualities themselves, well, let's just pick out the ones that are somewhat special to the Empire. The first ones are alchemical cluster bombs. Now they can only be fired at point blank range with that special alchemical rule and the torrent quality. So it's sort of a weird flamethrower with the bomb quality. And the weird thing about it is these are all aimed at the aft of some of the sky fortresses, which makes it weird. They fart, I suppose, some sort of weird alchemical weapons. The weapon profile itself sure as hell is interesting, it's just the placement on the models, as we'll discuss later on, is a bit weird. Another thing that you find here that is special to the Empire, and more specifically the Chinese, is they have a bombard weapon, 7 dice main weapon, 5 in support, with that alchemical rule as well, and extreme range. So you can really, once somebody has been hit with a debuff, with an emergency token, a disorder token I should say, you can start piling on a lot of damage due to that alchemical rule, even at a long range. However, this weapon is not benefit from any of the heavy magazines rule as commonly found on flagships, so it's still good, but it sort of, it's a difficult one to guess. Your mileage may vary, is what I'm trying to say. Other than that, this is the most interesting one in my book. The Hokyang and Heavy Hokyang. Now, both of them are flamer weapons in their gout profile, as in they use the torrent quality. They can, however, swap to having a blade profile where they swap torrent for gunnery. And when they do so, swapping those out, their range increase up to 20 inch, up to the closing range. Otherwise, it still remains an alchemical weapon, so extra points of damage for anything already on fire. And they come with Fusillade as well, so you can reroll your blue results if you get within point blank range. So there's even a reason to shoot this in point blank range as well, if your torrent template doesn't quite reach far enough, or if there's no point to just hitting multiple weapons, and if gunnery is not a disadvantage, there's very little to do. Very little difference in the end of the day. The Heavy Hokyang does this with 9 dice as the lead weapon and 5 dice in support. So 9 in general is enough to cause a point of damage to most ships. And so once they catch on fire, you can just start loading up extra hull point damage due to alchemical, so it's a very strong weapon. Normal Hokyangs do this with 6 in lead weapon and 3 as a support weapon, which again, 6 as a lead weapon is enough to cause concern for a lot of ships out there, so just getting a single disorder token on them and just spamming light Hokyang hits on them via that blade profile is a very nasty way of doing away with a lot of hull points very, very quickly if you want. So I consider these to be very strong weapons in the Empire arsenal. Now, what flagships have the Empire have access to? First of all is one that hasn't been released yet. It's the Hachiman Assault Carrier, which is for the Japanese. It is their traditional assault carrier with an SRS capacity of 8, which is not bad. It's what you would expect for a Mass 3 ship. Also, looking at the points cost, 250 points is on the high end of the scale, but not grotesquely high. And it being a Japanese ship, it comes with an above average armor value and citadel value for what you would expect for a flagship or a carrier, I should say. And it's not like it doesn't have anything else going for it. With 3 rocket batteries, small ones mind you, not heavy ones, and heavy magazines, this thing can put out a bit of fire as well. Let's not forget heavy broadside and heavy torpedo salvos. Even the carriers from the Japanese put out firepower that, wouldn't look bad on a heavy battle cruiser, and can even make some other nations' flagships go like, strong. So I think this is going to be an interesting one. It gets all the new benefits from SRS, as we've seen. Recon flight, allowing you to do a bit of card reshuffling should you want. And if your opponent drops a couple of mines, they can clear this out as well. So I think this is a very strong one. Also, it can take normal escorts or 2 of those Cheetah submersible automata for 15 points. Now, I think this has to say 15 points each, because it doesn't. If you read this, I would say you can just get 2 of those submersible automata for just 15 points, which I think is a bit cheap, because, if you do that, you end up with a ship that already has a very respectable fray of 12, and that can then take 2 extra submersibles to bump it up to a very respectable fray of 16. So this carrier can do some damage when it gets up close and personal as well, provided you give it some extra Cheetah submersible escorts. Now we see something similar with the Congo heavy battleship. The Congo heavy battleship replaces the ability to to fire or to launch any SRS tokens for heavy gun batteries instead. And with the armor and citadel bump up, this really makes it a very tough battleship. And let's not forget, in its battle fleet, it can also get devastating quality on those heavy gun batteries, giving it a lot of firepower at the end of the day. Along with heavy broadsides and heavy torpedo salvos, this is about as devastating as they can get, which is a very good deal for the 255 points that are being asked for it. Also, it comes with an internal shroud generator, so don't you be thinking that you're just gonna put this ship down. This one is very, very tough, and I think it's a bargain at this price point. The other ones, when we're looking at the Chinese battleship, is the Ninjing battleship. An absolute steal at 220 points. I'll give it that. It's a Chinese battleship, so it comes with that paddle wheel rule. So it's incredibly maneuverable as well, if you want it to be. Although, if you're using this rule, remember you don't drift, so you're losing that. And you have to deduct the mass from its speed. It's only going 3 inches forward, but it gets that unprecedented high turning on the spot move that you get with a flagship, or that's hard to get with any other flagships. It also gets heavy magazines, giving all of the heavy gun batteries some extra firepower. Or, if you want, you can replace them with heavy rocket batteries. That would be a total upgrade for 9 points, still making it cheap, if you want to use that mark of Yama more. This is not a bad ship to do it on. You do have to keep in mind, however, that you have one ship, or rather one heavy gun turret placed to the rear with a 270-degree angle, so good placement is again very important for this ship. But paddle wheel makes that placement child's play. You just have to remember that you won't be going very fast. And instead of getting a torpedo attack, it gets that juicy heavy Hokyang that we've already discussed. So it's perfect to set up a quick point of damage, so you can go to town with other Hokyangs found in your army. Another option to run it is to just replace the rear weapon with another type of generator, because if you give this thing an interface generator, it will also be very, very difficult to remove because of how good that generator is, and you will get an even better and cheaper deal out of it. So also a build worth considering. The Keijing is just a named version of this one. It has that rear gun swapped out with the interface generator. That is the main difference, but that comes at a price point of 235 points. And like I discussed, if you look at the Ninjing, that does the same thing. It would only come down to 210 points. So what does that 25 extra points get you? Well, it just gives you Vanguard here and Elite Crew. It's not nothing, of course, but I think that's a bit steep for what it brings. Not saying I like this ship, in other words. The Yangtze is the bombard ship, also for the Chinese fleet. It comes with that Erlen Sheng bombard that we discussed earlier, and it has 3 of those firing at the front. Remember, those are the weapons with 7.5 in that profile, and alchemical. So if something has been set on fire, this can really go to town. Now, the problem is 7 dice, not really a lot, but luckily this ship gets the spotter rule, and the spotter rule lets a unit gain the sustained quality to any weapons with the extreme range quality if the initial target is within 3 inch of this friendly SRS token. So you do get the cloud strike advantage that you can get with the Chinese fleet, and they kind of need it because they don't really have any normal carriers out just yet to get those cheeky little spotter SRS tokens out. It also gets logistical support, so you get an extra bit of victory and valor cards, which is, can be very strong, of course. But the problem is, at the massive 265 points, I think the Ninjing is just the better option. As in, it comes with more devastating weapons. It it doesn't have that weird mix as well. This one has a heavy Hokyang, meaning you want to get within closing range, but your Erlang Sheng bombards won't be firing if your opponent then closes that gap to get within point blank range. So I think this is just a very difficult ship to pilot and to get the most out of. And when you consider that the Ninjing ship also has what I think the better fleet composition, I think this one is a bit of a tough one to justify. But you can still, try it and see if it works for you. The handy thing about the set, the Ninjing Battle Fleet set, is that it is incredibly easy to swap out your Ninjing for the Yangtze. So don't feel like you're, just don't glue it down, and you can experiment with both of them. Now, a very exciting new entry into the Empire fleet is the Zhangmadao Sky Fortress. It's always hard to say these things right, but I think at 400 points, this is a steal. It's a dreadnought with mass 4, so that's definitely a good thing. Doesn't have any submerged defense, but don't let that scare you. It's a Sky Fortress, it's an aerial unit, and you don't get targeted by pesky submerged weapons. So don't worry about that. And the respectable 9 aerial defense weapons is also quite strong. Now, being an aerial flagship, it means you can't just escort it with anything. You have to escort it with something with the aerial escort duty. And the fun thing is, that can be one of those funky mechanical dragons, the Tianlongs, that we've mentioned earlier. So I think that's, well, depends on what this model is going to look like, but that just looks freaking cool. What does the Sky Fortress bring in terms of offensive capability? Well, first of all, it has an SRS capacity of 10, so that's very good. It's what you would expect for a mass 4 ship. So there's going to be a lot of planes flying out of this one. It also has heavy magazines, so it brings a lot of firepower, because you're counting not just 3 but 4 heavy gun battery with 360-degree firing angle on each one of them. So this one, yeah, it can be aimed at anything you want. It's not the fastest. Drift 4 and Speed 4 means that, you're not going to break any lap records around the open seas, but it's not horrible because of its 4 drift value. And you get, included for that 400 points, a generator. Now, I can mark this whole thing, or I can just mark this. I suppose you know what that means. You take an interface generator. There's no doubt about it there. That makes it tough as old boots, because interface generator, a total of 20 hull points, with a still fairly respectable 7 armor, but a citadel that won't just means it'll crumble down, because the Ice Maiden for the Empire, the Imperium has that issue. It has a very low citadel value, so you're just taking crit upon crit upon crit. I don't see that happening with this one, so it's a strong entry as far as I care. It's weird that it has the agile rule, but means you can turn during your drift phase, unless of course you have navigation lock. But yeah, it's mobile. It needs to be, because it has those alchemical cluster bombs firing in the aft. I've already mentioned that. That is the torrent weapon shooting out the back with alchemical. So, a weird one to get in there, especially with only moving 8-inch. However, it also comes with an internal shield generator. If you can stack that with the interface generator, you really have something that is hard to take down. And you get the new SRS goodies in terms of mine clearance, and you can shuffle through your cards with this one. All in all, for 400 points, this is a very strong entry. I'm personally going full Japanese with my Empire army, and I kind of regret doing so looking at this ship, because it looks amazing. Now, onto the normal ships, the meat and potatoes of your fleet. First of all is the Dao Light Cruiser. It's one of the smaller ships you can build out of the Chinese frontline squadrons. It comes with a heavy gun battery aimed to the front, and that small little rocket battery that's also aimed to the front. And it comes with a Hokyang. It's a bit of a weird combination. if I were to take this ship, I would definitely consider swapping out the heavy gun battery for a heavy rocket battery for 3 points. I think that makes most sense, because then you can actually use that Mark of Yama to, to sort of get the most out of that one. It's not something I would specifically build around, but I don't consider this a useless ship at all. If you upgrade it with a heavy rocket battery, it comes in at 81 points, which I think is incredibly reasonable given it's still a cruiser with cruiser-like defensive stats, and actually fairly quick as well for a cruiser, which and comes with that juicy Hokyang, so you get a reasonably cheap access to it. Now, the Chinese can get some cheaper access to Hokyang though, if that is what you're after, but we'll talk more about that when we get there. It also has Vanguard, so it's moving up the board rather quickly for those cheeky little quick objective grabs that you can sometimes get when you're fighting over the oil rigs, and it can sweep any mines up that your opponent is dropping. And don't forget, these things actually can move fast enough thanks to that Vanguard. A Vanguard can be any direction, so that you can sort of be a defense net against mines, which I think is a very handy little thing. Next up is the Gong Destroyer. If you want to get your hands on these, you have to order the Tianlong Battle Fleet set. Those plastics are the ones that include this Gong Destroyer, and you kind of want to get your hands on those because these are very good ships. When we saw them used, it was just amazing to see how much firepower came out of them, even with the nerf to rocket batteries that we found in the recent updates. I mean, rocket batteries are down to 5 weapons main and 2 in support, but you actually have Pack Hunter to up that a bit with these, to compensate a bit for that. And they still get that Mark of Yama with Skyfire, and if your opponent is being a bit cheeky and trying to out-deploy you, you can still Shadow Hunter it as well. So these rules at 35 points per model is an absolute steal in my book, because they come with some very respectable defensive stats as well. With Armor 5 and Citadel 10, they are only 2 hull points however, but yeah, I don't consider hull points, by the way, for Mass 1 ships to be as important, because as we've seen with the Enlightened, you can have a ship that has a lot of hull points for a Mass 1 ship, but then a weak Citadel of 8, and then that Citadel trumps anything, because one single critical hit destroys a Mass 1 ship regardless of hull points. So the lower amount of hull points is not something that really bothers me all that much. And the best thing about this ship as well, you don't have to, because it definitely changes its role for more of a hang back and pepper the opponent with rockets to get in there and get in their face. You can replace one of those rocket batteries with a Hokyang for free. It's the cheapest source of Hokyangs. These are still the full-sized ones, the ones that you find on cruiser-sized ships. So if you want to go that heavy alchemical route, this definitely is a unit you want to consider. Next up is a Japanese ship, the Hokkaido Heavy Cruiser. It's what you would expect from a heavy cruiser. The points are somewhat in line with what you want, about 120 points, so nothing too shocking there. It comes with a normal gun battery aimed towards the back and 2 heavy gun batteries aimed towards the front. This is how I'd like to see it. You have a few of those heavy cruisers that have the small gun battery aimed to the front and then 1 heavy gun battery in the back. This is the one that is easiest to pilot, because even if you're not making the most use out of that small gun battery, it's not the end of the day. It is, however, a Japanese cruiser, so you're not getting any Hokyangs, you're just using the normal torpedo salvo with these as well. I would not really play these for the Mark of Yama, because then you're just paying extra points for that gun battery that on its own isn't going to do anything. Even if you're using the 3 of these cruisers, that's a bit of a waste of points. However, with Frey 10 for one of these ships and the option to take a Cheetah Submersible, you can actually get something that has punch in close combat as well. And for a heavy destroyer, speed 7 is nothing to be ashamed of. It's actually fairly quick. And if you look at the armor value along with the citadel value, you're getting something that is quite tough. So I'm liking this entry. The Honshu Light Cruiser is a Japanese ship as well. It trades in one of those heavy gun batteries. So it's very similar to the one we've just discussed, but at a much reduced points cost, for the cost of one of those. And of course, it only has a regular broadside, whereas our previous entry actually had a heavy broadside. So you do notice that in the weapon loadout. Also has a lot less fray, a lot less armor, well, 1 point of armor less, but a similar citadel, but it gains extra speed to go with it. Because of this lower fray, I'm not sure I would be going for the Cheetah Submersible Automata if you're taking a unit of these, but that's just my own personal opinion on that one. You can try if you want to. Next up is the Ishikawa Strike Cruiser. By the way, side note, the Japanese really have a lot of Mass 2 ships because those new plastics coming out for them build 8 variants of cruisers. That is, I think, the highest number we've seen so far. So if I'm mentioning a lot of Japanese ships with some similarities between them, that's the reason why. Now, what are you getting out of this? Well, you're only getting a single heavy gun battery, so that is the shortest snoot you can get for your ship, and the torpedo salvo with a broadside. However, this is kind of a repair ship. It seems like a lot of points for what it is, but it's a repair ship to repair your Cheetah submersibles, and it comes with one for free. You have to take it. And seeing how the Cheetah submersible is generally 15 points, that explains why this ship comes in at 110 points per model. That's why I find it hard to justify that these things cost another 110 points per model. You're not getting any Cheetah submersibles extra, because it's just for the unit. May take one for free. So I think if you're going to take one as a cheeky little repair ship, do not go for multiple ones of these. It's just fine if you have one cruiser left that you want to build something with, but don't go for squads of this. That's a waste of points, in my opinion. It does, however, not just repair things, it also has the mine layer option, so getting one of these in is again a reason to just take a single one of them and not a unit as well. Now, the Jiang Cruiser. The Jiang Cruiser is the one you had to take when you were taking that very good Ninjing battle fleet. And why did I say that it was a very strong cruiser option when we were talking about this one? First of all, 83 points is incredibly reasonable for a basic cruiser. Let's just start off with that. It comes with all of the advantages you have from being Chinese, so it has the very mobile paddle wheel. It comes with 2 heavy gun batteries, one pointed to the front, one pointed to the rear, but both with 270-degree angles, so you can still get a lot out of that broadside thing. The question is, do you want to? Because it again has that Hokyang on there that you can just pile onto your opponent, and it is incredibly cheap for doing so. And it can escort any of these Chinese flagships for a cheeky little extra, +2 air defense and submerged defense to go along with it. So I think this is a very, very strong option to have 3 of them. If the Ninjing battle fleet requires 3 of them, I'm not mad. That's just fine. The next one is a Japanese one. It's the Kanagawa Monitor. It's their smallest ship variant with just 1 heavy gun battery aimed to the front and just a torpedo salvo. If you're looking for a cheap source of some long-range firepower in terms of torpedoes for the Japanese, you might be able to find it here at 75 points. It can also take a Cheetah submersible if you want to. Fray 8 doesn't make it exceptional at that, however. And, let's be honest, for a monitor, this thing is quite slow. It does come with Shadow Hunter, so you can redeploy it should you so desire. And with Maritime Patrol, it can reroll any of the blank results when attacking submerged units, provided the target has at least one SRS token near it. So it's more of a hunter for submarines, which is why you kind of want to use those torpedoes against it, because don't forget, submarines are automatically shrouded, but you can never be shrouded against torpedo attacks. So at 75 points though, it's not the most appealing one. It's very specialized in what it does, and I don't think I would be building this one with the Japanese plastic set when it comes out. Next up is the Kyoto frigate. Expensive for frigates, 31 points. That is expensive. Normally frigates die to a stiff breeze, however, and at armor 5 and citadel 11, this one doesn't. But with just a single gun battery for 35 points, when this same faction has something with 2 rocket batteries or a rocket battery and a Hokyang, the internal balance is way off. I would never consider these. In fact, only if I have some filler that I need to do with these, and given their points cost, they're not even that effective a filler when you can get the above mentioned monitor for 75 points. I just don't think this is a good one. Also, the fact that the gun battery is only aimed towards the front and you don't get any of those paddle wheel mechanics with the Japanese, this is not my favorite, not at all. Back to the Chinese, these are the Maru heavy cruisers. The Maru heavy cruisers are cheap for heavy cruisers. Let's just start off with that one. 110 points is incredibly reasonable. And what do we get for that? Rocket battery, 2 heavy gun batteries, heavy broadside, and a Hokyang. Now, because this rocket battery, the small one aimed to the front, is not replaceable with a normal gun battery, I would opt for a heavy rocket battery upgrade almost as a standard for these ships. But if you do so, you get a Hokyang on them as well, which is great. It's an expensive source of Hokyangs, let's just say that, but if you do want something to use with that mark of Yama, I think this ship is your best bet. And also at 7 armor, this and 5 hull points, this one is a fairly durable ship as well. So it's not like it has to go into the bin or anything. It's a very reasonable ship, in fact. It's just the one that you have to take in that Yangtze fleet, and I just think the one with the Jian and the Ningjing is the better route to go. Next up is another Japanese ship. It's the Miyagi Scout Carrier, coming in at 120 points. It's the one with only the heavy gun battery in the front and a torpedo salvo, but it does have an SRS capacity of 2 to go with it. The Japanese plastics come with this launch bay pointed towards the back of the ship, and it has a reduced SRS capacity. This is actually more of a hybrid ship that comes with some, it's a weird hybrid between a normal frontline ship and still having some aircraft capacity as well. It does do what you would expect though for airships. You can launch them ahead of time with combat air patrol, and it has mine clearance. It doesn't have the recon flight mechanic though, so it's not like you can take these for a quick little cheeky card shuffle thing. That's not an option with these ships, sadly. So because of that, I think the 120 points cost is on the high end of the scale. I mean, you do get a reasonable firepower, don't get me wrong, but if you want those SRS tokens to really matter in any meaningful way in an attack, you do want to get at least 3 of those, and I think the points cost is a bit prohibitive for that one. Now, you can also get the Okinawa Reconnaissance Cruiser, which is very similar. It just comes with the 2 heavy rocket batteries with it instead of just the 1. It also has SRS capacity 2, and this comes with slightly more maneuverability in the form of Vanguard, so it can actually move up the board, which is weird for the heavier ship as well when you think about it, but It's again that hybrid between combat frontline ship and support ship. And at 140 points, it is on the pricier end of the scale. Compared to our previous ship, 20 points extra gets you an extra heavy gun battery. And the option, of course, like with most Japanese ships, to take a Cheetah submersible as well. Mind you, with Frey 9, this could also be a very appealing thing to do. So, but yeah, you're paying a lot for them. Next up is the Osaka Cruiser. It comes with, that's the one you have to take in the Kyoto fleet if you, the Congo fleet, if you want to get the extra benefit from it. 2 heavy gun batteries and a torpedo salvo for still a reasonable points cost. Reasonably high toughness as well, with armor 6 and citadel 11, so a bit better than what you would expect. And it can take a Cheetah submersible as well, should you so desire. I think this one is a bit expensive compared to the Chinese. If you compare this to the Jiang, for instance, it does sort of, it underperforms slightly in my book. Torpedo salvos are not nearly as interesting a weapon as the new Hokyang is, I think. Next up is the Shanghai Frigate. Now, there's 78 points. Doing a bit of quick calculations is weird because it's 26 points here. So it's not weird, sorry. It's just 26 points per model. I think that is a bit much for a 4-8 Citadel Mass 1 ship with just 2 hull points and only getting a single rocket battery. Again, for just 9 points more, you're firing or using Gong destroyers, which are a lot more durable and just have a lot more firepower to them. They do get Pack Hunter though, to compensate a bit for not getting that many shots anymore for the rocket batteries, but I think they are also a bit overcosted for what they do. Or, well, sometimes you can also go for saying that the Gong in itself is a bit undercosted, but I don't think it necessarily is. And then one of the funnest ships, I think, in the Empire fleet, the Tianlong Draconic Colossus, at 110 points. I think that's very reasonable, because, as we've discussed at the very top of this video, you can get them into a configuration where they get a free shroud generator, an internal shroud generator packed into them as well. And for just a ship that is 110 points, it's using that juicy heavy Hokyang. With the new blade profile and the fact that they are reasonably fast, 9 inches of movement, but coupled with Vanguard, they have been performing really well on flank duty. 3 of them on the flank where they can advance and activate as one of the first units, meant that they've been able to just go and burn down stuff on the flank, while not really taking a lot of firepower from long range distance, because don't forget, this is an aerial unit. A lot of the long ranged weapons in this game are torpedoes, and yeah, they don't really have to care about any of those. So I thought this was, so far, a very performant unit as well. And kind of new, they can now escort Chinese ships, so they can come alongside with one of those Sky Fortresses as well. They don't get the juicy little internal shroud generator when you're going for that route though. I would prefer them in their own special battle fleet. Also, with Shadow Hunter, you can do some really fun things. Don't forget, these units are aerial units. They're the first ones that have to be deployed. And you can just put them centrally, draw out a lot of ships from your opponent, because they would be rightfully afraid of those dragons, only to then see them hop off to the other side, and this is before any Vanguard moves, so they can still move up 5 inches on one of the flanks, meaning you can do some very funky things if you're the Empire opponent, or you can be really caught with your pants down if you're having to face Empire. And I'm just giving you a warning, don't fall for it when he's doing that. They can be placed anywhere. Don't make your deployment based on those Tianlongs. He'll just have you. Now, with that heavy Hokyang, it can be replaced with a Heatland set for free. I would never bother because the Hokyang's so good. You can also swap out the gun battery on the top for another generator that you get. However, if you're taking them with the free shroud generator, I would not go for that option. If you're taking them separately, for instance as an aerial escort, I would perhaps consider dropping the gun for the interface generator. There's still plenty of damage coming out as well, because this thing is also very good at ramming with that claw arc projector. So there's just one option in here that you should never take, because it makes no sense whatsoever, and that's here. You can include these in Japanese fleets as well. They can just swap out the trait. It loses the aerial escort duty rule, which is fine, because that was just for Chinese ships to begin with. But if it is a Japanese unit, it can replace the heavy gun battery with a Bushi Ryu Dojo. It looks super cool. It's one of the coolest modeling options it has. And then when it comes to the rules, womp womp womp. It just gets 4 fray. If you had reduced the points cost by 10, you could have taken a Fury generator, which also gives you 4 fray and additional speed and drops your points cost. So this Bushi Ryu Dojo needs to be completely redesigned. It would have been cool if it was like, you know, a jetpacked samurai, which give you an increased fray range or a boarding range, but right now it's a dud entry, so that's something they have to take into account. Now, one thing though, it does get the death from above rule, so you can actually ram any unit you want, except for those with the submerged trait, which is important because you can get the most out of that claw arc projector as well. But if you're going for ramming anyway, it's very, very satisfying doing damage in that movement phase and then just firing something up and then potentially even doing more damage in the boarding phase, the assault phase that follows. I just like this, and just look at how cool they are. I mean, instantly fell in love with them. Now, next up, enough waxing lyrically about the Tianlong, is the Wusong Monitor. At 62 points, it's incredibly cheap for a Mass 2 ship. Let's just start with that one. And most other factions, when you're taking monitors, they're sometimes stuck with like a 4-8 value for the defensive ones. These are not. They get the full 611 with only one single hull point less than the other ones. I think that is really, really cheap at 62 points. I would happily pay 70 and upwards for a ship of this quality, if I'm honest. The heavy gun battery, it's just the shortest ship that you can get, comes with the Hokyang, so it's a fairly cheap source for Hokyangs. Of course, not nearly as cheap as the Gong destroyers, but you know, what is. And it also comes with the added advantage of being a minesweeper, so your opponent can see that one, see his own mines being cleared up rather quickly. It doesn't come with Vanguard, this one, however, like our previous entry did, so if you're going to be using it to sweep mines, you could, but it's not quite as good at it. But let's not forget, 62 points, this is an insane steal. Yamaguchi Attack Cruiser, it's a Japanese one. It's also one of those repair ships, but it's the one with the 2 weapons in the front. So it's one that also comes with the Cheetah Submersible Automata for free. And it has that same issue that we saw with the other one. It's 125 points for your first Yamaguchi Attack Cruiser. You can justify that high points cost compared to the heavy cruiser by saying, like, oh well, this one at least comes with the free Cheetah Submersible, but you're paying that for every one of those. Now, if you want a repair ship though, and it's a cheeky one-off, I would take this one. Now, I never really mentioned how this moonpool business works, so I'll just do it here. If one of your Cheetah Submersible Automata should be destroyed within 10 inch or more of one, or less, of one of these units with this rule, you roll a dice, and if you roll a counter or a heavy counter, in other words a blue result, the thing is just not removed, and is instead placed in base-to-base contact with a model in a unit with this rule. So it just returns to become part of the unit that it comes with. Now, seeing how this thing has fray 9, and it can gobble up cheetah automata from other units if your opponent is shooting at them. That means that they can actually just get to a very high assault factor of their own if you want to. So I don't consider this a worthless addition to the Japanese fleet. I would just not go for taking any more ships than just the one. And then a new entry for the Chinese, the Ziwei Sky Bastion, which is the Mass 2 flying fortress. Comes with only a single one of those heavy gun batteries, but hey ho, can't expect 4 every single time. I don't consider this to be as good a thing as that flagship we talked about earlier though, because 150 points for something with SRS capacity 4 is already on the steep end of the scale, and it does have that cheeky torrent towards the back, but with just a single heavy gun battery, I think this one is slightly too expensive for what it does. It does get mine layer, so that's a bit of added value, I suppose. And it's not like this thing is useless at all, don't get me wrong. I mean, it's still an aerial unit that can take a bit of punishment as well, because it has 8 hull points at the end of the day, and you will get the Chinese access to SRS tokens, which can be very handy if you are going the route of the Yangtze. But like I said, I already considered the Yangtze to be slightly overcosted compared to the Nanjing, and then you have to combine them with slightly overcosted Sky Bastions as well, if you're not taking the Sky Fortress. And yeah, I think that those points can be tweaked a bit in the future. And that was it for the Empire faction. If you liked the video, make sure you give it a thumbs up, and I hope to see you for the next one. Bye!